Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Gender and Development Studies, SOGDS, Master's Degree Programs, MA in Gender and Development Studies, MAGD, Second Year, MGSE 001 Gender Planning and Development Policies, Block -1 Traditional and Emerging Planning Methodology, Unit-1 Planning, Historical Perspective and Methodologies. 1.1 Introduction. Planning is the most basic and pervasive process involved in managing any organization or plan or policies. It means deciding in advance what actions to take and when and how to take them. Planning is needed, firstly for committing and allocating an organization's agency's limited resources towards achieving its objectives, and secondly for anticipating the future opportunities and problems. As you have studies is MGS 004, Gender Planning and Gender-Sensitive Planning focus on achieving the goal of promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. They seek to bridge the gender gap on resources, opportunities, privileges and attainments. From your earlier study and reflection, can you differentiate between gender planning and gender-sensitive planning? Planning is deciding in advance regarding what to do, how to do, when to do it, and who is doing what. Planning bridges the gap from where we are to where we want to go. It facilitates appropriate action which would not otherwise happen. Planning is intellectual in nature and entails looking ahead and preparing for the future. However, as you would understand, planning needs to be translated into implementation in order to achieve the stated objectives. In this unit, we are going to review the history of planning in India and explore the planning process and different types of plans. We encourage you to reflect on the implications for gender planning in particular. 1.2 Objectives. After studying this unit, you should be able to evaluate the historical perspective of planning in India, describe the nature and importance of planning, analyze emerging trends in the planning process, suggest steps to be taken for effective planning, and explain the significance of women's representation in the planning profession. 1.3 Planning. Planning implies I. Selecting a suitable alternative. There can be any number of diverse opportunities and alternatives to choose from. Planners seek to choose the alternative which offers maximum potential for growth and development for attaining stated objectives. 2. Committing resources. Resource utilization for achieving planning goals is an area of primary emphasis. 3. Setting time limits and deadlines. Planning incorporates setting a specific time limit within which an exercise must be completed. Each person from top level to bottom level has to plan for exercise their daily, weekly and monthly activities towards achieving the goals of the organization. 4. Planning ensures the most efficient use of scarce resources. Planning implies coordinated, interrelated effort towards achievement of the common objective rather than individual objectives. Joint, coordinated effort implies pooling resources and their optimum allocation without any wastage. Planning is the only way by which an organization can exercise control to check on progress in achieving the desired course of action. It is only when there are objectives to work for and plans to achieve these objectives that the executive authority can exercise his control to measure the performance of his organization, department or subordinates. An organization without plans and controls lacks direction and defines negotiation. Tools. Planning is needed at every level of management and departmental activity of an organization or agency. 1.4 Historical Review of Planning in India. The Indian National Congress, under the inspiration of Jawaharlal Nehru, set up the National Planning Committee towards the end of 1938. The committee produced a series of studies on different subjects concerned with economic development. The committee laid down that the state should own and control all key industries and services, mineral resources and railways, waterways, shipping and other public utilities and, in fact, all large-scale industries which were likely to become monopolistic in character besides the National Planning Committee, NPC. 8 industrialists conceived a plan of economic development, which was popularly known as the Bombay Plan. There was also a Gandhian plan. The world-famous revolutionary, M.N. Roy formulated the People's Plan. All these plans are of historical importance only because they were paper plans which were never implemented. Just after the attainment of independence, the Government of India set up the Planning Commission in 1950 to assess the country's needs of material, capital and human resources so as to formulate plans for their more balanced and effective utilization. The first 5-year plan commenced in 1950 to 51 and it was followed by a series of 5-year plans. The Planning Commission set out the following 4 objectives for planning. A. To increase production to the maximum possible extent so as to achieve a higher level of national per capita income. B. To achieve full employment. C. To reduce inequalities of income and wealth. And D. To set up a socialist society based on equality and justice and absence of exploitation. 1.5 Nature of planning. Planning is necessary at all levels, though there is a greater need for it at higher levels so as to ensure organizational success. At the higher levels, planning is generally long-term, covering a period between 6 months and 10 years. It is concerned with goals and strategies for the entire organization nation. Planning at the lower level is invariably short-term, ranging from planning for the next day to maximum 1 month ahead. It is only concerned with individual work units or departments. In the context of gender and development, we need to focus on planning development interventions as well. This necessitates involving the target group in the planning process. Participation of both women and men may be important in planning a particular intervention. From the various definitions and origins of planning, it is easy to identify the following characteristics. A thinking process. Planning is an intellectual exercise. It is concerned with thinking how the existing combination of resources may be adjusted and adopted to match the emerging opportunities. Experience shows that if opportunities defined at present are not discovered and opportunities not availed of in time, they may turn into problems in future. Planning enables decision-making about A. What is to be done, B. How it is to be done, C. When it is to be done, and D. By whom it is to be done. Timely and careful thinking lays the groundwork for the course of action in future. Planning can help an organization to maintain a dynamic equilibrium between the external environment and its own goals, values, and technical, organizational and psychosocial subsystem. It also enables decision-making about the problems to be addressed with their prioritization as well as ways to avail of opportunities based on the urgency, importance and solvability of each problem areas. Contrasting requirements of forecasting and planning. What is the difference between forecasting and planning? Forecasting describes what one expects to happen if no changes intervene to prevent that happening. Planning describes what one wants to happen. Forecasting may encourage some people to do planning exercises. Forecasts of decline in sex ratio, for example, has led some countries to plan for protection of the girl child. Even so, forecasting cannot be equated with planning. It is true that planning is based on assessments, estimates, assumptions and judgments. But these are based on availability of resources and time to accomplish the objectives. Moreover, Planning provides for a regular review of performance towards the targeted goals and necessary corrective measures in case of deviations. In the modern context, planning is based on quantified data and information. Now it is becoming more scientific. Accomplishment of group objectives. A work organization is an assorted group of widely varied human beings, each with a different personality, attitudes, learning, motivation, etc. It is unlikely that these people will work effectively, harmoniously, and consistently unless they have a plan which they consider to be their common property. Planning is essential to any goal-directed activity. It enables people with divergent perceptions and motivations towards achieving common goals. Can you relate this to the context of planning, development interventions? How would you involve women in articulating their needs and perceptions? Choice between alternatives. The modern environment may often be marked by rapid and sweeping changes. The mix of resources that had been worked out to meet the opportunities in the past may no longer be effective in the present. Similarly, the present mix of resources may not produce the desired results tomorrow. Planning seeks to adjust and adapt the existing mix of resources to meet the emerging opportunities. The first choice to be made is with regard to objectives of the organization. The next choice is to respect the strategy to be adopted to accomplish the objectives, and then comes defining and implementing the operational part. Pervasiveness of planning. Planning is a basic condition for a goal-directed organization. However, it would be wrong to regard planning as an exclusive occupation of higher levels in hierarchy only. It is true that people at the top level have to devote considerable time and attention to planning as a whole. But the importance of planning by the middle and lower level functionaries within their areas of activities cannot be minimized. The various steps in the planning process necessarily involve functionaries at all levels. The first task is to determine the objectives. The next step is determining how the objectives are to be achieved. This consists in defining the resources which need to be developed, the opportunities to be availed of, or the problems to be tackled. The last stage is concerned with operational details, namely, assignment of tasks, allocation of resources, setting the time frame, regular review of performance, etc. In fact, involvement of personnel at all levels is essential for the success of planning. People at work become motivated when they are offered involvement in meeting a challenge. Contribution to planning gives people psychological satisfaction and a stake in their own future. This is relevant to gender planning since both women and men subscribe to defined gender roles. They need to be involved actively in reshaping and redefining these roles. Planning interventions which seek to bring about social change and promote gender equality need to help women become stakeholders. Flexibility. Successful running of an organization involves matching of its resources with the opportunities in the changing environment. This exposes the need for a careful conjunction of the mix of people's capabilities, knowledge, skills and motivation on the one hand and materials, tools and money on the other. However, since the environment keeps on changing rapidly, the mix of resources needs to be altered in response to environmental needs. Only proper planning can enable adjustment and adaptation to the resource-integrated process. Planning involves selection of achievable objectives and formulation of simple and realistic policies, programs, procedures, etc. for the accomplishment of those objectives. In selecting the objectives and the course of action to be followed to accomplish them, there may be differences of opinion among the personnel in the organization, particularly those directly involved in the planning function. In the case of planning development interventions, Opinions of community members, especially women, need to be emphasized. Effective planning takes care of the conflicting views and settles for a course of action with the maximum interest of the organization and target group in case of development interventions. Integrated planning will fulfill the maximum interest of the people. 1.6 Importance of planning. The increasing pace of environmental changes has increased the need for anticipating developments and planning to meet their requirements. The survival of an organization will be threatened from all sides when the management does not identify the emerging situations and does not prepare to meet them. The following points highlight the importance of planning. 1. Selection of optimum goals. Planning involves a proposed course of action with rational thinking and decision-making. It also implies selection of one course of action and rejection of other possible courses of action. The selected course of action, naturally, suppose our goal is to promote enrollment of girls in primary schools. What would be the economic, social and political factors we would need to consider? Promotes the overall, organizational goals within the framework of the available resources and economic, social and political factors we would need to consider. 2. Tackling increasing complexities. An organization is a heterogeneous group of human beings with different views and ideas in many respects. Unless a common plan to guide the individuals toward achieving the goals is formulated, they will not work effectively and harmoniously. Thus, planning is essential to any goal-directed activity. A self-help group, SHG, of women is a form of organization. Can you list some of the goal-directed activities an SHG may select? 3. Meeting environmental changes. The environment changes rapidly and sweepingly. Changes in social values trigger changes in people's needs and preferences. As you know, social construction of gender and gender roles changes over time. This will trigger changes in the existing equilibrium in any organization or community. Both inputs and the transformation process need to adjust and adapt to suit the environmental changes. Only proper and effective planning can help to achieve this process of adaptation. 4. Safeguard against failures. In many cases, failure of programs, policies and plans is caused due to hasty and careless decision-making and the lack of proper planning. The failures occur due to conflict, unpredictability of people's needs and preferences, rapid societal changes and abrupt economic and political development. It is true that planning cannot avert all failures, but it enables functionaries to assess and evaluate each emerging opportunity and problem and examine the various courses of action to counter each problem effectively. Let us take the example of income generation initiatives targeted at rural women. Why do they often fail? It may be because of lack of attention to income and time poverty of women by the planners. 5. Unity of action. Planning enables the people within an organization or community to work effectively and harmoniously for the accomplishment of common goals. It provides them a stake in their own future and thus induces them to do their utmost to meet the challenge. Do you think women can be described to have unity of action? Are they a homogeneous group? 6. Effective coordination and control. Planning makes it easy to exercise effective control and coordination. The work to be done, the persons and the departments which have to do it, the time limit within which it is to be completed and the costs to be incurred are all determined in advance. This facilitates proper and timely measurement of actual performance and its comparison with planned performance. In case actual performance is not as per plans, factors responsible for the same can be ascertained. In the absence of planning, there will be no standards to measure and evaluate performance. 1.7 Major steps in planning. Planning is concerned with the future. The more uncertain the future, the greater the need for a plan. But increasing environmental uncertainty has made organizational planning quite difficult. Now the use of mathematical models and quantitative analysis are increasing in the planning process. Use of computers has made planning quite a sophisticated exercise. In the case of gender planning, we may focus more on the importance of social capital. There cannot possibly be a standard planning process to be followed by all organizations or for serving all community needs. It would differ depending upon the size, nature of activities, and peculiar environmental constraints. So every organization or community has to develop its distinct planning process. Broadly speaking, the planning process could comprise the following major steps. 1.7.1 Identification of the opportunity or problem. The environment affects the planning process. It imposes constraints or limitations on the organizational action. At the same time, it also provides opportunities and challenges which the organization could use to its advantage. The constraints and opportunities provided by the environment may be in the form of governmental regulations, existing cultural norms, limited financial resources, changing technology, production of goods and services, etc. The basic purpose of identification of the opportunity or problem is to adapt and attune the organization or community to its environment. Planning must facilitate the adaptation of the organization to its environment. This makes the planners interpret and analyze the complex and often ill-defined environmental forces and take necessary steps to use and or respond to them effectively. 1.7.2 Collection and analysis of relevant information. Effective planning depends on the quality, relevance and validity of the information. But quality and validity of information is not easy to determine because the skill to do so is acquired by experience. The sources of information and methods of collection will largely determine its validity. The sources of information may be classified as external and internal. External sources will include suppliers, customers, professional people, trade publications, newspapers, magazines, conferences, etc. Internal sources will comprise meetings, reports, contacts with superiors, own ranks, and subordinates. Functionaries may collect information, first, by informal monitoring. As part of this, no conscious effort is made to collect information, and the same is obtained only by observation during the normal work schedule. Secondly, information may be obtained in formal scanning, such as keeping track of external sources such as newspapers, journals, reports emanating from associations, other organizations, governments, etc. The third method of information collection is to set up a department or a functionary to collect all available information as regards a specific purpose. Considerable skills are necessary to collect information about the organization. It includes scrutiny of the information and developing a cause-effect relationship between various factors and determinants. Over the years, several sophisticated quantitative techniques have been developed for the purpose, such as trend projections through econometric models, regression analysis, substitution effect, etc. 1.7.3 Establishment of objectives, analysis and interpretation of information will serve to define objectives and goals with desired clarity. It also makes the objectives free from individual bias. Objectives need to be established in every area. The performance and results are having direct effect on survival and growth of the organization. They point to the desired outcome that an organization seeks within the limitations of its internal and external environment. Accordingly, An organization may aim at stability of operations, growth, and a higher rate of return, leadership, and innovation. However, executive authorities play a key role in determining the objectives of an organization. Needs and perspectives of different members and groups need to be considered. Each member or group may have their own reasons for contributing to the organizational efforts. However, mere setting of objectives will not be enough. There have also to be specific policies, procedures, and strategies to make the accomplishment of objectives operationally possible. Organizational objectives also need to be split into specific, short-term and measurable objectives for the concerned work units or departments. If we are conceptualizing objectives for development interventions for promoting gender equality, what are the specific short-term and measurable objectives we could list? 1.7.4 Determination of planning assumptions or limitations. Planning has to take into account numerous uncertainties in its environment. Important components of the internal environment are A. Technology, B. Structural relationships and organizational design, C. Employee attitudes and morale, and D. Managerial decision-making processes. Internal environment is within the control of organizational functionaries who can appropriately adjust and adapt to the requirements of the external environment. Uncertainties relating to the external environment are beyond the control of organizational functionaries. These may be in respect of A. Fiscal policies of the government, B. Economic condition, C. Population trends, D. People's demands and preferences, E. Competitors' plans and activities, and J. Personnel practices. It is not necessary to formulate assumptions in respect of all the environmental factors. Only factors affecting plans must be identified and evaluated. Moreover, since the best formulated assumptions may be nullified by unforeseen changes, it is better to make a series of assumptions ranging from the realistic to the most optimistic, and pessimistic plans may accordingly be prepared for each set of assumptions. Preparation of multiple plans to take care of every contingency may increase administrative burden, but it will broaden the outlook of functionaries and personnel, making them more sensitive to environmental factors. In any case, it is not necessary to formulate the alternative plans in great detail. 1.7.5 Examining alternative courses of action. Often there will be more than one action plan to achieve a desired objective. In fact, in many situations there are an unlimited number of alternative plans of action. In some cases, however, the alternatives may not be many. The number of alternative action plans prepared by a person would depend on his sense of imagination, skill and experiences. 1.7.6 Weighing alternative courses of action. There may be many alternative courses of action for doing a task or activity, but all of them may not be equally suitable or practicable. Each alternative plan has its strong and weak points. A proper evaluation of the alternative action plans is necessary to determine which of them would be the optimum. Evaluation of each alternative action plan gives the opportunity to elicit different points of view and define aspects such as A. Its effectiveness in contributing to the accomplishment of organizational objectives, B. Its ability to withstand the effects of environmental changes, and C. Its integration with ongoing action plans. Accordingly, each alternative needs to be subjected to close examination for determining its suitability. In conditions where objectives are short-term and availability of capital and labor is not a problem, and behavior of the other relevant factors is also easy to determine, evaluation of different alternatives does not pose any problem. But as planning goes deeper into the future, evaluation of alternatives becomes more and more difficult. Various statistical and mathematical methods may prove useful in some contexts. Suppose we were planning an educational intervention for adolescent girls in an urban slum. Can you think of two alternative courses of action we could consider? 1.7.7 Selecting a course of action. Whether the evaluation of various alternatives is directed by individual preferences and prejudices or it is based on group opinions also matters. A decision has to be taken in favor of one or the other courses of action. The plan of action ultimately chooses one alternative, which is the optimum or the best under the circumstances. In certain contexts, mathematical or statistical models may be used to facilitate the choice. 1.7.8 Determining secondary plans. Secondary plans flow from and are dependent on formulation of basic plans. These are meant to support and expedite the achievement of the basic plans. They would have to be prepared to facilitate execution of the basic plans. 1.7.9 Providing for future evaluation. Planning is undertaken with a view to achieving certain predetermined objectives. It is necessary to devise a system for continuous evaluation and appraisal of the plan. This will help in identifying any shortcomings to initiate suitable corrective action in time. In the case of gender planning, we would need to carefully consider the availability of baseline gender-sex disaggregated data along with the concerns they uncover in the contemporary reality. After implementation of plans, we would need to evaluate progress relative to the baseline. 1.8 Long-term and short-term planning. Planning is often distinguished on the basis of the length of the period for which the planning exercises is undertaken. Accordingly, there may be long-term and short-term planning. However, the length of the planning period will depend on the organizational level, type of business, the production cycle, managerial practices, and so on. The nature of plans or policies or programs will also determine the length of the planning period. Thus, in the case of fulfilling larger long-term objectives, the cycle may be 12 months. The planning period cannot be shorter than the objective cycle. The planning is based on the objectives. If the objective cycle is shorter, the planning period is also shorter. 1.8.1 Long-term planning. Long-term planning covers a long period in future, example, 5 or 10 years, and sometimes even longer. It is concerned with all the functional areas of policy in the context of a particular organization or agency. Also, it takes into account all long-term economic, social, and technological factors and their impact on the long-term objectives of the organization. Long-term planning can help to set the targets towards the accomplishment of policy activities. All resources related to policies, plans and programs are pressed into service to accomplish the objectives determined by long-term planning. It is also known as strategic planning because it is concerned with preparing the organization or agency to face the effects of long-term changes in the environment, such as entry of new programs, policies and plans, new competitors, new techniques, and so on. 1.8.2 Short-term planning. Short-term planning, also called tactical planning, covers a short period. It usually covers 1 year. It deals with specific activities to be undertaken to accomplish the objectives set by long-term planning. Thus, it relates to current functions of outcomes and may also relate to specific aspects of the internal and external environment. Short-term planning further classifies these functions into various subfunctions. 1.8.3 Planning to accomplish specific goals. Long-term and short-term planning encompass all the functional areas of the organization or agency. Planning to accomplish certain specific goals covers one or a few of these areas. But such planning is only supplementary to long-term or short-term planning of the organization and, in a sense, it can be called intermediate planning. 1.9 Making planning effective. While it is true that planning suffers from several limitations, an organization cannot exist without planning. The following steps should go a long way in overcoming these limitations and making planning effective. 1. Creation of suitable organizational systems. An organizational system needs to be created that facilitates planning. Functionaries at every level should be encouraged and given necessary facilities to plan their goals and activities with the active participation of the personnel and stakeholders. This would help the organization to remove the hurdles in their development and facilitates attainment of defined goals and objectives. 2. Involvement of executive authorities at higher levels. In one view, the planning process ought to be initiated by the executive authorities at higher levels. Long-term strategic planning for the organization as a whole should be undertaken primarily at this level. On the basis of the top-level planning process, the departmental or sub-departmental level planning should be undertaken by the middle and supervisory levels in formal organizations. Consultation and participation are considered vital. We can emphasize the importance of bottom-up planning in planning development interventions. Participation of beneficiaries being targeted may be critical in ensuring meaningful, feasible plans. 3. Wider participation. The long-term planning for an organization as a whole must be undertaken by top levels of executive authority. It can be given a concrete, workable shape only with the help of functionaries at lower levels. In fact, the most effective way of planning is where every functionary is granted freedom to plan in respect of his area of activities. Participation bottom-up may be made possible through various modalities. They are management by objectives, under which common goals at each level of activity are established by supervisors and workers together. Long-term planning can help to set the targets towards the accomplishment of policy activities. All resources related to policies, plans and programs are pressed into service to accomplish the objectives determined by long-term planning. It is also known as strategic planning because it is concerned with preparing the organization or agency to face the effects of long-term changes in the environment, such as entry of new programs, policies and plans, new competitors, new techniques, and so on. 1.8.2 Short-term planning. Short-term planning, also called tactical planning, covers a short period. It usually covers 1 year. It deals with specific activities to be undertaken to accomplish the objectives set by long-term planning. Thus, it relates to current functions of outcomes and may also relate to specific aspects of the internal and external environment. Short-term planning further classifies these functions into various sub-functions. 1.8.3 Planning to accomplish specific goals. Long-term and short-term planning encompass all the functional areas of the organization or agency. Planning to accomplish certain specific goals covers one or a few of these areas. But such planning is only supplementary to long-term or short-term planning of the organization and, in a sense, it can be called intermediate planning. 1.9 Making planning effective. While it is true that planning suffers from several limitations, an organization cannot exist without planning. The following steps should go a long way in overcoming these limitations and making planning effective. 1. Creation of suitable organizational systems. An organizational system needs to be created that facilitates planning. Functionaries at every level should be encouraged and given necessary facilities to plan their goals and activities with the active participation of the personnel and stakeholders. This would help the organization to remove the hurdles in their development and facilitates attainment of defined goals and objectives. 2. Involvement of executive authorities at higher levels. In one view, the planning process ought to be initiated by the executive authorities at higher levels. Long-term strategic planning for the organization as a whole should be undertaken primarily at this level. On the basis of the top-level planning process, the departmental or subdepartmental level planning should be undertaken by the middle and supervisory levels in formal organizations. Consultation and participation are considered vital. We can emphasize the importance of bottom-up planning in planning development interventions. Participation of beneficiaries being targeted may be critical in ensuring meaningful, feasible plans. 3. Wider participation. The long-term planning for an organization as a whole must be undertaken by top levels of executive authority. It can be given a concrete, workable shape only with the help of functionaries at lower levels. In fact, the most effective way of planning is where every functionary is granted freedom to plan in respect of his area of activities. Participation bottom-up may be made possible through various modalities. They are management by objectives, under which common goals at each level of activity are established by supervisors and workers together, formation of planning committees at various levels, responsible for providing planning information, inviting suggestions and reactions from grassroots and supervisory levels in respect of planning efforts, and formulation of plans and grassroots budgeting, under which every unit within the organization prepares its own performance budget which is sent up to higher levels for its incorporation in the overall budget. 4. Effective communication of planning information. The organization should have an effective communication network for all the information flow relevant to planning of goals at every level. This should include specific and clear information regarding resource availability, organizational policies, strategies, and so on. 5. Integration of long-term and short-term plans. Short-term plans of an organization contribute to the accomplishment of its long-term plans. Therefore, the two should be effectively integrated rather than seen as being unconnected with one another. 6. Flexibility. Planning must take into account and provide for unforeseen factors. As such, each plan should be flexible enough to be modified and altered in the light of new developments. To this end, alternative plans and contingency strategies should be formulated in advance. 1.10 Women's representation in the planning profession. Several professional planning organizations are concerning about the need to equalize the representation of men and women in the planning profession. It cannot be assumed that women planners represent the interests of women in general. A broader gender balance is an important determinant for creating gender equity and improving inclusivity within the profession. In March 2008, data for the Royal Town Planning Institute, RTPI, which is based in London, showed that women make up under a third, 31.4%, of its 21,213 members in the planning profession. In South Africa, the numbers of women in the planning profession have been rising between 1994 and 2004, and their representation increased from 28% to 34%. The UK and North American data seem to indicate that a proportion of female planning students do not continue to register with the institute after graduation or they leave the profession. Data shows that while the number of female planning students and female planners has increased steadily, the number of the former have far outstripped the latter. It seems that women planning graduates have left the profession for three main reasons: changing fields, lack of employment opportunities, or becoming stay-at-home mothers. In Australia, the professional planning body, the Planning Institute of Australia, has been proactive in identifying these trends. It has proposed recommendations that will positively impact on the number of women in planning practice and improve their workplace experience. Now all the countries in the world are motivating the participation of women in the planning field for creating balance and equity in society. Thus, this will lead to the gender mainstreaming process, which ensures that women and men have equal access and control over resources, equal access to development, benefits and decision-making at all stages of the development process of projects, programs and policies. 1.11 Summary. To conclude, planning is a concept of executive action that embodies the skills of anticipating, influencing and controlling the nature and direction of change. Thus, this unit explained the historical perspective of planning, emerging perspectives on the planning process, its nature and its importance, and women's representation in the planning profession. The nature and importance of the planning process was explored, and implications of gender planning were defined. The major steps involved in the planning process could include identification of the opportunity or problem, collection and analysis of relevant information, establishment of objectives, determination of planning assumptions or limitations, examination of alternative courses of action, weighing alternative courses of action, selecting a course of action, determining secondary plans, and providing for future evaluation. This unit also stresses that the increased representation of women in the planning process will bring positive changes, and this is the first step to mainstream gender in the planning process. Data quoted in this unit shows that the number of women pursuing their graduation in the field of planning continues to be low, and they tend to leave university after graduation. Civil society and government can take steps to sensitize women to pursue a career in planning. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.